We got rid of basically the German ruling class. The Kaiser was forced to abdicate, and instead we had this democracy set up. Now, you know, a lot of neocons, a lot of neoconservatives who support our wars right now will say, well, we've had such great success because Germany today in 2010 is a democracy, and that shows that American nation building and intervention can be successful. Well, I think we need to look at what happened after American intervention in World War I, because the result of that was also a German democracy. But it was the Weimar Republic, which turned out to be so feeble that it could not resist Bolshevik revolutionary activity. And because Germans were terrified of what the Bolsheviks would do if they ever gained power in Germany, Germans, including a lot of people who were not really sympathetic to Hitler, wound up siding with the Nazis because they thought the Nazis were the only people who could save them from the Bolsheviks. As a result, what you wound up with after World War I was eventually the toppling of the Weimar Republic and the coming to power of the Nazis. World War I also, of course, led to the end of a short-lived experiment in democracy and republican rule, and also the final abdication of the Tsar in Russia. It was the First World War and the stresses that that placed upon Russia's economy, which allowed for the Bolsheviks to carry out their revolution and come to power. So the result of World War I, which was supposedly fought for the self-determination of small nations and the rights of neutral countries and so forth, was actually the creation of two massive totalitarian forces, the Soviet Union and communism on the one hand, and then Nazi Germany on the other. And of course, that led just where you would expect it to lead. It led to World War II. Now, during World War II, and actually in the lead up to World War II, most sort of conservatively minded people in the United States, I'd mentioned in my last lecture Albert J. Nock, who was one of the outstanding thinkers of that time. There were many, many others, a lot of libertarian journalists, a lot of conservative senators, for example. They were very much against the idea of us getting into the European conflict in the late 1930s because they remembered what had happened after World War I. They remembered that it was, economically and militarily a disaster for all of Europe, the winners as well as the losers, and it was also imposed tremendous costs on the United States. And they knew that, if we get into this Second World War, we will also see a similar number of, consequences that will basically create perpetual wars, as well as the sheer carnage they will impose upon American soldiers. And in fact, that is what happened. I mean, we think of World War II now as the good war, the war that came to, a totally happy conclusion with the defeat of Imperial Germany and Adolf Hitler. But in fact, as was mentioned in one of the other lectures, the result of World War II was actually letting Joseph Stalin have half of Europe. World War II was a tremendous advance for the cause of totalitarianism. It was a tremendous loss for the cause of freedom. We Americans came out of World War II less free than we had gone into World War II. And that was certainly true of many of our allies as well. Britain, experienced basically a socialist government as a result of the, hardships of the Second World War. So conservatives had been against all of these sorts of adventures up through the middle of the 20th century. For all the reasons that I had mentioned, war means a vast financial burden on taxpayers. It means more centralization of power in government. It means disruption of families. It means, death on a tremendous and almost unimaginable scale. And this held true even through the Korean War. Now, American politics was starting to become very complicated because after World War II, it was clear that we had a number of tensions with the Soviet Union. And there basically became, before we had an actual arms race with the Soviet Union, we had a metaphorical arms race right here in the United States between Republicans and Democrats who each tried to bait the other as being insufficiently tough on the USSR. And conservatives played this game to some extent, although one of the most outstanding conservatives in the United States Senate, an Ohio senator by the name of Robert Taft, he was, willing to play along a little bit and say that, the Truman administration was going soft on communists in Asia and that Truman was responsible for China becoming a communist country. But Taft really was very cautious about getting the U.S. into military conflicts. He wasn't a total non-interventionist, but he believed, that the U.S. should be careful only to intervene on small peninsulas and islands. The United States should not try to enter continental wars in Europe or in Asia to try to reform or impose democracy or our system on anyone else. And Robert Taft was called back in the day Mr. Republican. And before Goldwater, he was really the most prominent voice for conservatism in the United States. And there were a number of conservatives who went much further than Taft in really arguing that the military system, the military-industrial complex, that was a phrase that Eisenhower used, even though Eisenhower himself had kind of done a lot to increase the size of the military-industrial complex. But there were a number of other conservatives besides Robert Taft who were very good at criticizing this entire thing. For example, a fellow by the name of Howard Buffett, who is actually the father of Warren Buffett. Warren's politics don't look anything like his father's, but Howard Buffett was extremely good and was in fact kind of the Ron Paul of the 1950s. He's really a figure I recommend finding out more about. I remember back during the 2008 campaign, we had a staff dinner where the campaign staff met up with Dr. Paul, and he spoke to us, and he explicitly mentioned Howard Buffett as one of his inspirations and as someone he saw as kind of a pathbreaker for himself. So, all throughout, this 60-year period, basically, from the 1890s until the 1950s, conservatives have been among the most prominent critics of America's rush to wars. Now, things started to change after that because of the Cold War, and as I'd mentioned in my talk earlier, conservatives became confused, and they started to think that being anti-communist was more important than being pro-Constitution. And so as a result, as I'd mentioned back then, you had a number of people who were not pro-Constitution, but who were in fact anti-communist, starting to take over the American conservative movement, and these people were the neoconservatives. And eventually they reached such a position of power that they were able to brand everyone on this panel as traitors and as people who aren't authentic conservatives and who must be some kind of radical leftist in disguise. Two of the panelists here served in the Reagan administration. I don't think anyone has ever accused Tom Woods of being a left-wing hippie. Where these are some of the most conservative people you can meet, and yet the official conservative movement is really just despises us because we point out that America's foreign policy is an imperial foreign policy. It's not a Republican foreign policy, small r. That in fact it's something that is destroying our traditional liberties rather than, as the neocons claim, simply exporting these liberties to other countries. It's really worth considering that. And I highly recommend Bruce Fine's book as a way of learning more about this. But the price that an imperial foreign policy exacts from a constitutional republic is just enormous. And empires themselves, they don't come to very nice ends. Think about the Ottoman Empire. It went bankrupt. It wound up basically getting taken over by its creditors. The British Empire suffered a very similar fate. The British Empire was virtually bankrupt after World War II. And they still tried to hang on to both the welfare state at home and also continue to control countries like India abroad. They just couldn't do it, so they wound up having to liquidate their foreign holdings and giving the Indians independence and of the other Commonwealth countries independence, so Britain could just try to keep their welfare state afloat at home. The Roman Empire is another example. The Roman Empire, because of its military overextension and its financial insolvency, wound up getting overrun by barbarians. This fate that has befallen all these empires, it befell the Soviet Empire as well. The Soviet Union was defeated not because the United States went to war with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was defeated because it had a massive military complex together with a feeble socialist economy. And the result of that was, of course, bankruptcy. It was great discontent among the Russian people themselves. And you also had nationalist movements in all the countries that the Soviets had been occupying that wanted to get rid of these Russian imperial occupiers. So the Soviet system was completely unviable and collapsed. America is now, unfortunately, under the guidance of neoconservatives, under the guidance of liberal interventionists like Barack Obama, proceeding down the same path to destruction that overtook the Soviets, the British, the Ottoman, and the Romans. This is this imperial path of believing that you can basically unite the entire world under one military regime, and the idea that you will not pay a terrible price in terms of liberty at home when you attempt to do this. The people who have opposed this and the people who want to conserve the traditional American ethic, our traditional way of life, and our Constitution, they are the real conservatives, not the ones who believe that the entire world should experience a revolution in any name, whether it's the name of democracy or communism or human rights, whatever it might be. In fact, we have a historic country right here. We have a patrimony that has come to us from founding fathers who worked very hard to devise a scheme of government that would work for people who had our kind of culture. this cannot easily be exported. What it can do, and what is truly the meaning of this idea of America as the shining city on the hill, is not that we would go out, occupy other cities, and try to build shining cities on other hills. It was that by shining, we are a light to the nation. They can see our example. We're like a lighthouse, and they can say, well, you know what? Look at what America's doing. This works. This is an amazing departure from the brutal history of the world where you've had continuous wars and you've had continuous oppression. The United States was meant to be a shining city on a hill that gave an example to the world. It was not meant to be a fortress from which soldiers could be launched out to occupy everyone else. So I have hope with the Ron Paul movement and with Campaign for Liberty that we're going to get back to the true meaning of America and the Constitution and get away from this imperial foreign policy which has so far already grievously compromised our liberties, and if it continues, will destroy them altogether.